Since 1981, Nihon Falcom has been developing some of Japan's most standout titles. By the company's second year in operation, it had released a staggering 11 games across Japanese home PCs. Among those was Panorama To, the company's first role-playing game. The game was colorful and imaginative, but primitive as well. Gameplay scenarios played out in the lower right-hand side, while a lot of interactivity was done in a text-adventure style format. In 1984, Falcom returned its RPG effort with the release of Dragon Slayer. By modern standards, it's incredibly basic, but it was revolutionary for its time, and is credited for being one of the very first action RPGs ever made. Think of all the fantasy, dungeon-crawling, top-down action RPGs you've seen from this era. Dragon Slayer was a pioneer of that. Falcom would continue to redefine the new genre with the release of Xanadu Dragon Slayer 2 in 1985. The sequel's graphics were leaps and bounds ahead of the original. Combat was still action-based, but now enemies encountered on the overworld were fought in a combat menu. Xanadu was one of Falcom's earliest efforts in building the kind of fully realized game world that the company is now known for. The game's concept was so well received that Falcom licensed the title to Hudson Soft to develop a Nintendo Famicom adaptation. Xanadu, an amalgamation of the names Famicom and Xanadu, released in 1987 for Japan, and was released in North America for the NES 2 years later, with Nintendo themselves picking up the publishing rights. Meanwhile, Falcom continued to hone its action RPG craft with the release of the first title in its long-running Ys franchise, Ancient Ys Vanished Omen. It was a game that built upon the innovation Falcom had achieved before, while also taking pages from other top-down RPGs that had spawned in the 80s. Not only did Ys find a home on a plethora of Japanese home PCs, it also saw licensed releases on the Famicom, Sega Master System, Microsoft DOS, and the Apple II GS, the latter three of which included English versions. By 1989, Falcom had released multiple games under the Dragon Slayer name, and brought the series to new heights with the release of its sixth entry, The Legend of Heroes. Dragon Slayer The Legend of Heroes had the DNA of its predecessors as well as some of the vibrancy of Ys, but featured turn-based gameplay and shared similarities with Enix and Chunsoft's growingly popular Dragon Quest series. The Legend of Heroes had fit snugly into Japan's blooming new world of fantasy-based role-playing video games. It had stern competition to be sure, but it also carved out its own niche and identity. There was even an animated adaptation of The Legend of Heroes, complete with cheesy early 90s dub.
What? It can't be!
I am the son of King Aswell and rightful heir to his throne, but you may call me Sirius.
Prince Sirius!
Well, now that you've blurted it out, we'd best move on before they come looking for you, my lord.
In 1992, it received a direct sequel, simply titled Dragon Slayer, The Legend of Heroes 2. With that, the serialization of Falcom's The Legend of Heroes had officially begun. With the third installment, Falcom chose to forego the Dragon Slayer name and titled their newest RPG, The Legend of Heroes 3, Shiroki Majo, or Prophecy of the Moonlight Witch as the West came to know it much later. The Moonlight Witch began what would become known as the Gagharv trilogy, a series of games set in the same world that would encompass The Legend of Heroes 3 through 5. Second was The Legend of Heroes 4, Akai Shizuku, or A Tear of Vermilion in 1996. And finally, The Legend of Heroes 5, Umi no Oriuta, or Song of the Ocean in 1999. The Gagharv trilogy would also receive numerous ports and finally saw the light of day in the West, when Bandai Namco released English versions on the PSP during the 2000s, which is what you're seeing here. This trilogy was the progenitor to what would make the future of The Legend of Heroes so special. Falcom had built a closely interwoven world full of drama, mystery, lore, NPCs, and classic turn-based combat. Gagharv challenged its players to explore its depths and rewarded them for playing the trilogy by answering their curiosity. All of these things became the hallmark of where Falcom would take The Legend of Heroes next. In 2004, Falcom revolutionized its Legend of Heroes series with the release of The Legend of Heroes 6, Sora no Kiseki, or as we've come to know it, Trails in the Sky. Since then, the Trails or Kiseki series has been the identity of The Legend of Heroes with 9 mainline entries over 14 years, and that's why we're here today. The Trails series is wonderful, and I think it's the best in the genre currently running today, but starting it can be very daunting. This is a series of 9 games across a multitude of consoles and PC, with deliberately intricate stories consisting of recurring characters, locations, and themes, all sharing one central plot. And this is to say nothing of the fact that there are more Trails games coming in the future. Someday the Trails series will end, and Falcom may release another Legend of Heroes title not under the Kiseki name, but that day is not currently within sight. Nevertheless, allow me to introduce you to the world of the Trails series. Allow me to take you to the continent of Zemuria. The Trails series officially begins in the year 1202 of the Septian calendar on the continent of Zemuria, a fictional and vaguely European/Eurasian megacontinent with various nations and states. The term Septian calendar refers to this universe's timeline, which shares its name with West Zemuria's major denomination, the Septian Church. The Septian Church preaches a monotheistic religion centered around the sky goddess Aidios. At the center of its teachings, the goddess Aidios is said to bestow her protection and blessings on the people of Zemuria. Included in that is the legend that she once granted 7 treasures to the people of ancient Zemuria. The start of the Septian calendar denotes the end of a cataclysmic event known as the Great Collapse, which saw the destruction of the ancient Zemurian civilization. The survivors of the Great Collapse were plunged into a dark age of ruin that lasted for hundreds of years. Lost were the ancient Zemurian civilization's great knowledge and technological prowess, as well as the legendary treasures of the goddess. By the year 500, the Middle Ages of the Septian calendar had begun, and the Septian Church began to permeate West Zemurian culture. The remnants of the lands before the Great Collapse had formed into the nations that we see at the start of the Trails series. In the far west of the continent lies the Liberal Kingdom, setting of the first arc, Trails in the Sky. Directly north lay one of the continent's 2 superpowers, the mighty Erebonian Empire, home of the series' third arc, Trails of Cold Steel. East of Liberal and Erebonia is the other superpower, the Republic of Calvard, the future setting of the potential 4th or later arc in the series. Landlocked between Erebonia and Calvard is the autonomous Crossbell state, the site of the series' second arc, a duology titled Zero no Kiseki and Owl no Kiseki. While the furthest lands of East and South Zemuria are largely unknown by fans thus far, there are other countries and states on the known continent. Directly north of Erebonia is Northumbria State, a former principality until not long after the end of the Middle Ages. Bordering both the Empire and Republic to the north is a largely undeveloped area called the Nord Highlands, home to a nomadic tribe of people. On the far north reaches of the continent is the scantily detailed Principality of Remiferia, known for its tradition of advanced medicine. Even less detailed is Orid State, a place known for hot springs and agriculture. It's located somewhere inland of Zemuria. The holy city of Arteria, location of the high seat of the Septian Church, and this universe's effective Vatican, is also somewhere centralized on the continent. And finally, the sovereign Le Mans state is also described as being centrally located and is home of the headquarters of 2 of the most important organizations in this universe, the Bracer Guild and Epstein Foundation. The Middle Ages are denoted as ending in 1150 when inventor C. Epstein of Le Mans discovered the power of orbal energy, a sustainable energy source harnessed from septium crystals which could be mined from the earth. The technology behind it is certainly fictional and a bit confusing, but here's the gist of it. Fragments of septium called sepith are refined into crystallized circuits referred to as quartz. These quartz then generate orbal energy to power devices known as orbments. Orbments are mechanical devices that use that orbal energy to operate everything from heating and lighting to vehicles and even modern weaponry. In 1154, C. Epstein passed away, and it was his disciples Albert Russell, G. Schmidt, and L. Hamilton that continued his work. In 1155, the Epstein Foundation had been established, and the 3 disciples left Le Mans to spread the discovery of orbital technology in their home countries and abroad. It was slow to catch on at first, but eventually people's skepticism at the new technology faded as orbital tech began to reshape the everyday lives of people in Zemuria. This period from the 1150s to the start of the 1200s marks the beginning of the modern era, and is commonly referred to as the Orbital Revolution. In the span of just one average person's lifetime, Zemuria had gone from the same level of technology present prior to our world's industrial revolution to roughly the same amount of technology we have today. In just 50 years, everything about life on the continent had changed. Finally, the source of the great technological prowess of the ancient Zemurian civilization had been rediscovered. That brings us to the start of the Trails series in 1202, with its first chapter, Trails in the Sky. Set in the Liberal Kingdom, the original Trails in the Sky, or first chapter as it's commonly known, acts as a prologue to the series as a whole and introduces many of the concepts explained in this video. The Liberal arc tells the story of 2 young heroes belonging to the Bracer Guild, an international non-government organization whose mission is to serve civilians and keep the peace. During their journey, they encounter several challenges as the complex plot of the Trails universe slowly begins to take shape around them, full of political and interpersonal drama, ancient mysteries, and a grand conspiracy lurking in the shadows. First chapter's 2 sequels, Trails in the Sky second chapter, and Trails in the Sky the third, conclude the story of the Liberl arc begun in first chapter, while neatly opening up the series in preparation for its future arcs. The Trails in the Sky trilogy is available in English by way of Xseed Games on Steam, GOG, and Humble. At the start of the very busy year of 1204, we moved to Crossbell State and joined the Crossbell Police Department. In this arc, Crossbell's heroes from CSPD's Special Support Section fight to overcome the many barriers that exist inside Crossbell State and Crossbell City. As an autonomous state, Crossbell is directly dependent on both Erebonia and Calvert, and the superpowers constantly fought over ownership of Crossbell during the Middle Ages. For the last 70 years or so, Crossbell has enjoyed autonomy, but the height of the Orbital Revolution has once again reignited tension between the rival superpowers over Crossbell's ownership, thus dubbing the issue known as the Crossbell Problem. To make matters worse, conspiracy grips the small city-state just as it did in Liberl, making 1204 the most eventful year in Crossbell's history since the Great Collapse. The duology, titled Zero no Kiseki and Owl no Kiseki, or as they're colloquially known, Trails from Zero and Trails to Azure, released on PSP in Japan during 2010 and 2011, and PC ports were also made by a Chinese publisher. Sadly, the games have never seen localization in the West. However, complete fan translations of varying quality exist for each, and are floating out there on the internet for you to find. Additionally, a fan localization project is underway to bring the first game's translation up to a quality on par with the official Trails localizations, and there's hope to someday do the second game as well. You can check on the status of the Crossbell editing project at geofront.exterior.net. As chaos gripped Crossbell in 1204, so too were flames rising in the Erebonian Empire. In the third Trails arc, Sin no Kiseki, or Trails of Cold Steel, the players see the political strife in the Empire firsthand from the perspective of a group of students at Thor's military academy in Trista, Erebonia. Erebonia is a traditional nation with a ruling emperor and class system. The nation's feudal lords have enjoyed power for hundreds of years, but the reformist faction in the imperial government, headed by the esteemed Chancellor Gileath Osborne, has the quality of life for the common people of Erebonia on the rise, much to the chagrin of the nobility. A year of tensions, sedition, and even terrorism gripped the Empire as it tumbles toward the possibility of full-blown civil war. But once again, slithering in the shadows is a phantasmal conspiracy dating back to the time of the Great Collapse that threatens to set all the Empire ablaze. The first half of the Cold Steel arc recounts the events of 1204 through the Erebonian perspective, and takes the series to early 1205. And the second half of the arc, Sin no Kiseki 3 and 4, which released in Japan in 2017 and 2018, moved the series ahead to 1206. Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2 are available on Steam, GOG, Humble, PlayStation 3, and PS Vita, and new PS4 versions will be available in English in 2019, also by way of Xseed Games. The third and fourth games are currently unavailable in English, but are the Trails entries next expected to be localized, with information on that hopefully coming in 2019. The release of Sin no Kiseki 4 in 2018 marked the end of the third Trails arc, and fans are currently eyeing where Nihon Falcom could take the series next. An arc in the continent's second superpower, Calvert, is inevitable and may very well be the setting of the fourth part of the series. Another candidate, according to Falcom president Toshihiro Kondo in a summer 2018 interview, could be Le Mans State, home to the Epstein Foundation and Bracer Guild. Fans have also long speculated if the series is someday fated to journey to places like Remiferia, Orid, and of course the holy city of Arteria. Wherever the next location may be, rest assured there are so many journeys in the Trails universe to experience, and unnamed heroes whose legends await. In the first 9 entries, Falcom has created the deepest and most fleshed out universe I have ever experienced in fiction, and I don't say that lightly. Truly, no one else in video games anywhere is attempting what Falcom is with this series. We're talking about crafting a story world and a single plot that could take over 2 decades to finish. Consider, if you would, just how old the video game industry really is. 30 years ago was the 3rd generation of games. In other words, the heyday of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Sure, that's past the prime of the Atari 2600 and other earlier consoles, but for many people of my generation, the NES is as classic as it gets. It feels like a lifetime ago, because it is. So to say that Trails could take 20 to 30 years from beginning to end, it's almost unfathomable, but a real possibility. Currently, the series is expected to take a break before the next arc emerges. Personally, I don't think we'll see the next Trails game until 9th generation hardware is on the market, though if industry rumors are to be believed, that's not too far away. Knowing what I know about the Trails series and how close its core plot is to being resolved, as well as what President Kondo has said about the series' progress in interviews, it's fair to think the series still has 2 or 3 more arcs in it. It took 14 years to tell the story of the first 3 arcs. Simple math tells you that if you double that, it could take another 14 years or so to finish it, and that's assuming everything goes as planned. Truth be told, the Trails series has a history of taking longer to tell stories than originally planned. Multiple games have had to be divided into 2 entries because the stories just became too big for a single game. The second arc, Crossbell, wasn't even originally planned, but arose out of a necessity to introduce the location to fans because Crossbell would be so important to the Erabonia arc. And the Crossbell duology turned out to be a masterpiece of RPG gaming and storytelling. All this is to say that gaming's greatest odyssey is only just getting started, and there's never been a better time to board Falcom's wild ride across the Zemurian continent than now. If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new here. Let me know what your favorite Trails or Legend of Heroes game is, or your favorite Falcom game period. Tell me how much you love Sorcerian or Brandish or why. If you're new to the Trails series and you can't wait to see more, then good news. This video is the start of my Trails Master playlist where you can see full, in-depth playthroughs of the Trails games in order. Join me as we travel to Liberl for the start of Trails in the Sky first chapter. And if you want, you can support me on Patreon if you want more stuff like this in the future. It's new, I just launched it, it's kinda scary, but it's happening. See you guys in the next one.